Welcome to the root of all success with the real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs unlocked success and how their stories can help you do the same. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason has built multi-million-dollar businesses that have been featured in Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine. His life's mission now is helping entrepreneurs live what he calls #the exit lifestyle. Introducing TEDx speaker, mastermind leader, author, entrepreneur, cigar aficionado, motorcycle enthusiast, and host of The Root of All Success, the real Jason Duncan. The real Jason Duncan.
Welcome back to another episode. I am the real Jason Duncan. You can call me JD. I'm glad to be here today. I've got a guy that I met on Instagram. Anthony Vicino is going to be my guest today. He has gone from being homeless 8 years ago or 10 years ago to owning and managing over $70 million worth of assets in multifamily real estate. Really interesting story. I met him, like I said, on Instagram because I follow a lot of really cool concepts around real estate, investing, etc. And I saw some of his Reels videos that he put on Instagram, and I thought, you know what, this dude's probably got some information I need access to. So I reached out to him and asked him if he could give me some advice on syndications. I'm about to do my first syndication with my mastermind group, the Exeter Club. And he was kind enough to set up a phone call. We talked for a few minutes. He introduced me to his attorney that could help me do it. And then in the process, I said, you know what, why don't you come on the podcast and talk about your story? And that's what we're going to do today. So let me tell you a little bit about who he is. Like I said, he was living in the back of a van in Oakland, California with $80,000 worth of debt 10 years ago. But since then, he's written over a dozen best-selling books. Very interesting. Not what you think they might be. He's built 2 8-figure companies, and he's acquired, like I said, over $70 million worth of real estate assets. And he did this through the power of delusional self-belief. And it's interesting what he's going to say about that. So that's why I named the episode what I did. It's the power of delusional self-belief. He and his partner, Dan Kruger, own Invictus Capital, and they're killing it. And they're doing all of their work in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities region. And Anthony's going to start off by telling us a story about a recent trip that he took. And then there's a very cool special offer he's making at the end. So make sure you stay tuned all the way to the end. Help me welcome Anthony Vicino to the show. Anthony, welcome to the show, man. It's good to see you.
Thanks, dude. It's good to be here.
Well, so we had a little bit of recording difficulties, so I'm not sure how this is going to work out. But I want you to tell that story because you told me pre-show, like off the cuff, like just nonchalantly, I just got back from Antarctica. And I've never heard anybody say that before ever in my life. So you got to tell me about this. What were you doing down there and how did you get there?
Yeah. So one thing I got to say about going to Antarctica is Antarctica is really, really cool, but maybe the best part of going is being able to say in casual conversations like, oh, I'm going to Antarctica, or I just got back, and people are going, wait, what? Like, it's a real icebreaker. So that's kind of cool. So Antarctica is a totally. Yeah. It's funny because like we went in February, which is summer down in Antarctica. So it's like 30 degrees, sunny. We got really lucky with weather. It's not always like beautiful and sunny. It can be really rough. But where I'm from in Minnesota, like it's been below zero during that same period. So it was warmer in Antarctica than it was back home. So when we finally got back home, I was like, I'm not ready for this. Like, got to bundle up and put on all these clothes. Whereas in Antarctica, like it was really beautiful. So the trip itself, though, like for full disclosure, like I am terrible at planning, and a trip like this requires a lot of organization and a lot of flexibility. So like I was really lucky that my brother, his fiance is a travel agent, and they wanted to go to Antarctica. They invited us and we're like, yeah, let's do it. So she took care of everything. And so if anybody's interested in going, hit me up. I'll connect you with her. She's rad. She'll take care of everything for you. But effectively how it works is like, you have to get down to the southernmost point on South America, which is, for us, it was Punta Arenas in Chile. And then from there, you have 2 options typically. The main way that people get down to Antarctica is they take a tour or an expedition boat or ship, and they'll go across the Drake Pass, which is a really, really gnarly bit of ocean. It's like a 2-day sail. It's really big waves. It can be really, really gnarly. We chose to forego that, and instead we caught a plane from Punta Arenas to King George Island. And the downside of that is you have a 2-day window when you're going to make the flight, but it all depends on weather. And it's really unpredictable in Antarctica. So like you're just sitting around waiting for the phone call. And then they're like, oh, yep, we're ready to fly. Get to the airport now. So you have like 20 minutes to go. So you're just sitting and waiting. And then we got really lucky, caught the perfect opening and the weather window, got to the island. And then we just hopped on this ship with like maybe 30 other passengers, something 20, 30 passengers. And then we just, took a 5-day cruise down the coast of Antarctica. Every day we'd stop in the morning, stop in the afternoon to do expeditions. So we'd go hang out with penguins. We'd see some whales doing their whale thing. And then the highlight of the trip for me was seeing this 1,000-pound leopard seal stalk and catch a penguin and then eat it. And we were in the Zodiac, which is like this big inflatable boat. And we're like right next to him, arm length away, like getting crazy pictures, just watching this thing happen. And it's a reminder that that nature's really brutal, but also incredibly amazing. So it was one of those trips that like, it's a true bucket list. Like you check that off and you're like, that's really worth going to see, because it's hard to put into words just how vast it is, like how big and pristine. So absolutely incredible.
So is it like what I imagine? Like it's just white. Everything is completely white, and there's just different levels of whiteness. You've got low white right next to the ocean and high white with mountains. I mean, what is it?
Yeah, yes and no. So there's actually a whole lot of rock exposed, especially in the summertime when like the snow is maybe melted a little bit more. So there's actually a lot of contrast between white snow and then like black rock, which creates this really beautiful juxtaposition. And then where the penguins all hang out, like during this time of the year, it's all rock. And so it's a lot of exposed stone. And they have this kind of algae that's red covering all the snow. So there's a lot of red hue where the penguins are hanging out. So it's not just like a white tundra. If you go like deep into the continent, that's all there is. This is just a white desert. They call it the white desert. But where we were on the coast, there's actually just a lot of texture and contrast. It is really gorgeous this time of year.
So how long was that trip? Like leaving Minnesota and getting there and getting back? Was it a couple of weeks? How long was that?
Yeah. I think we left on like the 6th or the 7th, and then we got back on the 21st. And so the travel just to get down there and back, that was 2 full days right there, and then kind of hanging out waiting for the opportunity to catch the plane down there. So when we actually were there was about 4 or 5 full days of expedition and going out. They call it expedition, but really it's just like you hop on a Zodiac, they take you around, you feel really cool and badass, but like you're not like doing anything too extreme.
Well, that's quite a bit different than your experience about 10 years ago of living in a van. So that's a big time difference. Now you're hopping on jets and going across the world to the South Pole and doing that kind of stuff. So take us back to 10 years ago when you were living in a van. What was what predicated your homelessness, I suppose, and then of course we'll get to how you got to where you are today. But what happened back then?
Yeah, so I mean, 10 years ago, it's interesting. I was actually doing a lot of similar things in terms of going on pretty crazy, wild trips as a professional rock climber at that point in my life, which sounds really, really cool because I got to go to like Yosemite, got to travel overseas and go to like these just remarkable outdoor locations and climb rocks. But the downside is that you don't really make a lot of money. So like on the one hand, you get to go and explore, but you're dirt poor. So the trade-off for me there was I had a life of a lot of freedom and the ability to go and do these epic trips, but I wasn't making very much money. I was subsidizing a lot of my lifestyle with credit card. And this all came to a head. I tried to marry this woman. I asked her parents if I could marry her. And her mom looks at me and she goes, "What are you going to do to provide for our daughter?" And it was like, this is the first moment that I'd ever really been faced with that question of like, what's my role as a provider or my role in society as being like a meaningful contributing member of the team. And so I went home after that conversation and really like looked at what I was doing with my life in terms of climbing. And that was a fun lifestyle, but I knew that it wasn't sustainable and it wasn't something that was going to lead me towards a life that I necessarily long-term was going to be proud of. Like in a very real way, I was just kind of Peter Panning my way through life through my 20s. Like I came out of college, had these degrees, but I lacked the ability to like work in a W-2, could work for somebody else. I have severe ADHD and it was very problematic because I was always getting fired. Like I was unreliable, I was like undisciplined, and like just all the things that make for a really bad employee. So like that's what led me to rock climbing, was this feeling of like, oh, I can be in charge of myself. I get to go do what I want, I go have these adventures and make a little bit of money. But when I decided I wanted to like get serious about this relationship with this woman, I looked at my skill sets and I was like, I don't really have any good skills for making money or providing. So I went to the one skill that I did have, which was writing. And I started writing science fiction and fantasy stories. And this was a skill that my dad had like really ingrained in me when I was young. He would pay me to write him short stories. He would pay me per word, like 10 cents per word, which is like way too much to pay a kid for writing a story. But it got me a lot of reps, because then I was like, I'm just going to write a lot of stories and make a lot of money. So my dad was just paying me for that. So all those years later, when I went back to figure out, okay, how am I going to make money? I was like, I'll write science fiction and fantasy. So just kind of like maybe an indicator of like how delusional I was at that point in my life, where I was like, who makes money? Stephen King makes money. I'll be the next Stephen King. So all that's to say is like, I wrote for I've been writing ever since, but about a year later, that woman who we got engaged, she left me. And it was that point where she kicked me out of the house. I was living in the van. I had all the debt still. I hadn't really gotten a lot of traction with the writing yet. And now I was just looking down the barrel of a life of like regret and resentment. And like, this isn't what I signed up for. So things were looking pretty bad there. That was about when I was 28 or so.
Wow. So you found yourself living in the van because you were struggling with this idea of whether or not you're going to be able to provide for this woman. You thought you were delusional, thinking you're going to be the next Stephen King or something like that. But you are a multiple best-selling author. So did that come as a result of you writing these fantasy books, or was that something else? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when it comes to, I think, being good at anything or being great, whether that's in business or real estate. Like, you have to be a little bit delusional in the belief that you have in yourself. I think that's a really helpful skill set to have, is the skill set of delusion, but also to be like rooted in a little bit of reality and like be able to look objectively. How good can I really be at this thing? And I knew I had the capacity to write well, but I was a little bit delusional in terms of thinking, oh, I could be the next Stephen King. But because I didn't have that limiting self-belief in myself, I actually went and made an effort, and as a result made it way further than I ever would have if I had just never taken a first step in that direction, because I thought, the likelihood of finding success is just so low. And I think that's what holds a lot of people back, is they think like, I have this big audacious dream and goal, but like, oh, I could never do that. Right. And so maybe for me, like the thing I got lucky to be blessed with when at birth, maybe, is just this delusional self-belief. And that really did pay off in the grand scheme when it came to writing. I've written 12 or 13 books at this point, and majority of them have hit the bestseller list at some point and did really well with that. But I think even more importantly is from the writing, that really set me up to start building businesses, which you have to believe in yourself, because nobody else really will in the beginning. Like, everybody else in your life, your friends, your family, everybody will look at you and say like, this is crazy. Maybe you shouldn't do this. Like, this is risky. And if you don't believe that it's possible for yourself, then you're not going to do the work and show up on day in, day out. You're just going to kind of let the critics hold you back. And so I think delusion's a little bit of a good thing, but again, self-awareness is a superpower. So you have to be able to objectively look and say, okay, what is this, just me pumping myself up, or is there something I can point to in my history that gives me a sense of belief that this is something that's doable, right? And self-awareness is a tricky two-edged sword. You go too far on one side and suddenly you're on the delusion side again.
Right. So your books, am I to understand then the fiction books that you're writing helped provide the financial ability for you to kind of launch into this real estate thing? Am I seeing that right? Is that right?
Interestingly, no. These days, yes. It took a long time for the fiction to really start generating good income. At that point in my life, when my fiance left me, I was living in the back of the van, still trying to get these books going and trying to get something, trying to get traction. And it was while I was in that van, a friend came to me and he's like, hey, we need to get you out of this situation. Your books aren't selling yet. Like, you're working at a gym, you're not making much money. And so he invited me to start building a business with him. And we started a window washing company. And that was really the catalyst. That's the thing that started making me really good money, was realizing like, oh, I have this skill set that lends itself well towards building businesses. And that was the initial source of income that got me into real estate, was having all this cash flow from these businesses. And I ultimately sold that one and had, a pretty good chunk of change that I started pouring into real estate. Because as I was asking all these people who were further ahead on the journey than me in life, I was like, what should I do with this capital? They're like, just buy real estate. So I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll just buy real estate. And it wasn't until many years later then that the books, because I continued writing throughout all these years, that they started making money as well. And then I just had this vehicle of real estate that just kept pouring it into it. But the initial bit was actually just from that window washing company.
So you're writing books that were getting published, but you aren't really making any money. You're started the window washing company, and you ended up. How many years did you operate that company before you sold it?
About a year and a half, 2 years. So we got in there, we scaled it pretty quickly from, zero to about $1 million, a little over $1 million of top line revenue in the first year and a half. And then I sold it so the way that we had formed this company was me and a buddy, and then we were bringing in our rock climber buddies to wash the windows, because they're really good in high places on ropes. So they could get into these jobs and do them at a rate that other cleaners couldn't do. And so when I decided to exit, we sold it to the employees to give them a means for, following suit in the same thing that we had done. So it wasn't like a big crazy exit to a private equity company or anything like that. It was a good exit, made good money from it, especially considering it was just window washing. But that was what, like, if anything, the biggest benefit to it was the knowledge of like how to do this, like how to build a business, how to exit it, how to build teams and systems to be profitable. And that served me really, really, really well, both in real estate and in other endeavors.
So I think that's really interesting that you were able to kind of go back in your what your experience was and use rock climbing as a way to benefit a window washing business. Like if you had said, hey, Jason, man, I'm going to talk to you. What do you think these two things have in common? Rock climbing and window washing. I mean, at first I might have thought, well, be able to climb, but what I wouldn't have really put two and two together. That's really very clever. And that helped you build a very successful $1 million business that you were able to exit the launch into real estate. So what do you think now, moving into real estate? So you've moved into real estate. Did you immediately go into real estate like by yourself to buy land, to buy a duplex, to buy an apartment complex? When you took that first chunk of money, whatever that amount of money was, and bought your first real estate, what was it? What were you trying to figure out? What were you trying to do?
So real estate was interesting for me because it came like the universe kept trying to put real estate in front of me at different points in my life. And I continually ignored it for a long, long time. So the first time the universe really tried hard was I was in college, and my roommate and his dad were fixing and flipping single family homes. And I would live with them, and in exchange for cheap rent, I would help knock down walls and do construction. And the thing I learned from that after doing 2 or 3 flips was like, if this is real estate, I want nothing to do with real estate, because I can swing a hammer, but I can't hit the nail. Like, I am not the handy guy. I did not want to be doing renovations. And I think for a lot of people, that's the first experience that they have with real estate. They watch HGTV and they see like the fix and flip shows and they think, oh, that's real estate. And that was my experience. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. So fast forward, maybe around the time that the window washing business started doing well, a friend came to me and he's like, hey, I'm buying these quads in Oakland. Do you want to go in on this with me? And I was like, still thinking about that previous experience. I was like, I want nothing to do with that, but I believe in you and your skill set. So I gave him money to go do it. And like, that was almost passively investing before I even understood what that really meant. And those, we still own them today. They're still doing really, really well. And it wasn't until maybe a year after that, it was right around the time that I was exiting the window washing business, that I was starting to think about real estate in a different way. And when people were like, put your money into it, I was like, okay, I can understand that this building is like a tiny business. And if I understand the levers that go into like making it profitable, whether that's increasing revenue or decreasing expenses, then I'm going to have this lovely little business. And I wanted to understand every aspect of the business as intimately as I could. I didn't want to outsource any of it. And this has always been something that's been core to how we build businesses, is whether it was window washing or our manufacturing company, we try to eliminate as many of the middlemen as possible so that our teams, our skills, our competencies are the ones that are running the show. And so what I did from the very beginning was the first asset that I acquired where I was like, this is my real estate career. I'm like moving into this new area. It was a triplex that I had with an FHA loan, and I lived in one unit while renting out and managing the others. And that was the perfect experience because I got to see firsthand how to be a landlord and how to operate this building from ground level, which then served as the springboard as we started to grow and expand the portfolio. So I could really understand what needs to happen. And I think that's allowed us to scale relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've grown to about $70 million of assets under management. We have about 12 people on the team now that are actively managing the portfolio on our behalf. And it wouldn't have been possible, I think, if from the beginning I had just gone straight to outsourcing to a third-party property management company.
Well, you obviously are doing some things right. I mean, nobody stumbles upon a $70 million portfolio. That's actually your presence on Instagram doing videos about investing is what attracted me to you, because I didn't know you from Adam, nor did you know me. And I saw a couple of your videos, and I'm in the process of putting together my first syndication. And I was like, this guy, I like his videos. He does a good job with the videos, and he's probably been in Antarctica. I don't know, maybe. So maybe I should reach out to this guy and ask him a question. And you were so kind enough when I DM'd you, like, get back to me, and here we are. So let me ask you, let's kind of put this in timeline perspective. Living in a van 10 years ago.
Let's take a quick break to thank our amazing sponsors for making this podcast possible.
As an entrepreneur, I know that you have to deal with sales on a regular basis. I mean, every entrepreneur does. And if you aren't paying attention to sales as an entrepreneur, you're not going to be an entrepreneur for very long. But I've got a sponsor of this show called Dub that helps you bring the personal back to sales. If you want to figure out how to improve content creation and improve client trust, improve your sales process, decrease the sales cycle, because we all know time kills deals. If you want to increase client bookings and increase conversions, you need to take a look at Dub. There's a special offer for Dub for listeners to The Root of All Success at therealjasonduncan.com/Dub, and that's DUBB. I've been using this for years. I'm a huge fan, and I'm so honored that they're our primary sponsor of the podcast. But they have helped over 60,000 businesses around the world communicate better, to make sales easier, to make sales more personal. And it's built Dub for growing teams. I mean, you can set up video emails, you can set up custom onboarding, you can do admin reporting. You need around video and sales and automation. Dub is there. You can try Dub now. Your conversions to sales are waiting. All you got to do is go to therealjasonduncan.com/Dub. And there you're going to get 2 weeks for free to try Dub. Plus, you're going to get 50% off your first 2 months of Dub. You can't beat that. So go check it out. Go to therealjasonduncan.com/Dub. 40 years ago, you weren't in business unless you had your business in the Yellow Pages. You remember those things? And 30 years ago, you weren't in business unless you had a door-to-door salesman. 20 years ago, you weren't in business unless you had a website. And today, you're not in business unless you're doing social media content. Am I right? Social media content. Social media content in the form of like micro content, which is 30 to 60 second spots on Instagram Reels or TikTok or YouTube Shorts. That's the way business is done. As a matter of fact, that may be how you found out about this podcast or me as a business coach. This medium that we're using today to communicate what we do is vitally important. And just recording yourself isn't enough. You've got to do it right. And my friends over at Story do it right. And one of the problems with doing it wrong is that you sit around thinking, well, what the heck am I going to record? What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? Like, I don't know what to talk about. Well, Story takes all of that away from you. Stop wasting time trying to come up with content, because Story will send you a video prompt on what to record. You can pick the categories you want to record in, whether it's real estate, entrepreneurship, finance, relationship, leadership, life insurance. It could be anything. Don't waste time on that. And by the way, if you're not confident in talking on video, or if the video editing portion takes up way too much of your time, Story will edit the videos to perform well on social media. They add the subtitles, the pop-ups, the zoom cuts. They remove all the filler words like and and. They remove the awkward pauses. And then they take that video and post it for you. They write the captions, they add the relevant hashtags, and they post it on the platforms that you care about the most. It's exactly what you need to be in business today and to be successful at it. So if you want to learn how to do social media the way the influencers do, you need to go to therealjasonduncan.com/story. And that's story with 2 Y's. Why? Because they're awesome. Go to therealjasonduncan.com/story. That's STORYY for 10% off your first 3 months to try Story out. You're going to thank me later.
Thanks for listening to our sponsors. Now, back to the show.
Did the window washing thing, and you sold that. I'm guessing, if I'm putting the time together, about 8 years ago. Is that right? Is that timing correct? And then, so you've only really been into real estate for 8 years. Is that correct? So now 8 years to $70 million. So that's not quite $10 million a year on average. Obviously, that's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way. But if you look at it over the 8 years you've been doing it, almost 70 million, that's significant. Why do you think you've been so successful at this?
Well, I think there's luck. Luck is a really big one. I think it helps to be in the right place at the right time, but maybe to give a little bit of context. So when I started in real estate, actively managing my own portfolio, I just thought I was going to buy real estate with my own money. I was going to manage it, and that it wasn't going to be a career thing. It wasn't going to be a business that I was building. It was just this other side thing for me. And it wasn't until 2019 that I was getting a lot of questions from friends and family about wanting to invest alongside me and like how to get into real estate. They're asking all these questions. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about what that would look like. And that happened to coincide with when I met my now partner, Dan Kruger. It was end of 2019. And that's when we formed Invictus Capital and started bringing investors into our deals. That's when we started syndicating. So before that, over the years where I had just been acquiring my own assets, I maybe had maybe $2 million of assets at that point, just with my own money. And then from there, 2019 moving forward, that's when we've acquired the bulk majority of our assets. And so a lot of it was understanding the right systems and the right business model that would allow us to scale. Like if I was still doing it with my own money and everything was predicated on my balance sheet and my skills to operate it, I would grow a lot slower. It'd be, the theory of constraint says that, the area that's the most constricted is going to hold you back. And I would be the biggest bottleneck there, especially from a capital perspective, because to go and acquire $70 million of assets, you need, $25-30 million of capital, which I just didn't have sitting around. So the way that we got there was first by getting really specific about what makes us unique and special in this marketplace. And that was a couple of things. One is we focus only in our backyard, which is Minneapolis, Twin Cities. So that's the only market where we acquire assets because we know this market like the back of our hands. We know all the sellers, know all the brokers, we know all the lenders. We can operate in this market in a way that our competitors, if they're coming from out of state, they simply can't. So that's one thing that makes us unique. The second is the in-house property management. So that allows us to operate our assets more efficiently than pretty much anybody else can if they're relying on third party. And so once we got really clear on like what makes us unique, then it was just a matter of letting those sellers, lenders, brokers know, hey, we're buying. Here's what we're looking to buy. Here's what meets our criteria, so that when they have opportunities, they bring it to us. And then two was we needed to find a way to get our deal flow and our capital flow synced. Because if you have too much capital but not enough deals, it doesn't do you any good. It's just dead money sitting there, right? If you have too many deals but no capital, then you can't get them done. And so our key was always, we need to figure out how to get our deal flow and our capital flow so that they are in lockstep. So on the one side of getting very clear about what our parameters were, what makes us unique on the operations side, we also needed to simultaneously start putting out the message to attract investors who maybe resonated with our business model, our investment thesis, and just us as individuals. And so over the last 3-4 years, that's really been the challenge, is like, let's bring in the deals and let's bring in the capital at the same rate. And the third part of that stool that complicates everything is because we have in-house management, we can't just throw tens of thousands of units on the team simultaneously. They have to be able to, keep up with that. And so the hiring and the training of the team is just as critical as the deal flow and the capital flow. So for a lot of groups that do what we do, they don't do the in-house management. They'll just outsource that part. So they only have 2 of these things that they need to worry about: capital and deal flow. And then we like to complicate it and make it harder for ourselves by also putting in the operations.
So did you say that up until 2019, so if we go back 8 years, so we're looking at 2015, if I'm doing my math correctly. So about 2015, you get started in real estate. You are able to take down a couple of $1 million, if I've understood you right, personally, like in assets. You had a couple $1 million in assets, is that right? And then in 2019, you and Dan kind of came together and formed Invictus Capital or Invictus Multifamily. Is that right? InvictusMultifamily.com. That's the name of the website.
The company is Invictus Capital, but there is a crypto fund that's out of the Cayman Islands that has InvictusCapital.com. So if you want to find us online, go to Invictus Multifamily. They are actually, we're going to try and get that URL from them because we have the trademark to Invictus Capital, but they took the URL. So it's
so you and Dan formed Invictus Capital, and over the last 3.5 years, you guys have been able to take down through syndications a total of about $70 million in multifamily real estate. So was that all through syndication? It sounds like it is, but is that pretty much all through syndication or most of it?
No, that's a good question. So I would say of the 70 million, about half of that is syndicated. The other half is just joint ventures. So we will find 1 or 2 investors. We'll find an asset that's a good fit for everybody on the team, and we'll maybe just do it as a small joint venture. Recently, in the last year, we've done 6 tenant in common structures. So what that is one of the things that attracts passive investors to the syndication model is they don't have to be active, right? Like they just put their money into the deal. The operational partners, us at Invictus, are the ones that will find the deal, manage it, do all the hard work and everything associated with it. And so they love that structure. But a lot of people, they discover the syndication model only after having already bought some single family homes, some duplexes, maybe some Airbnbs. So they've acquired a little bit of an active portfolio, and they get to the point where they're like, oh, you know what? Like, this is great. I love real estate, but I don't want to actively manage this stuff. And they discover the syndication model. Maybe that's through our book or maybe through a podcast. And they're like, oh, I want to do this. Well, now they have a problem. They still have this active portfolio that they have to do something with. So what a lot of our investors will do is they'll start to offload those buildings. But the problem is when you go to sell one of these investment buildings, you're going to get hit with capital gains, right? So the golden goose in real estate is to be able to do a 1031 exchange, which is you sell one building and then you roll the proceeds into a new building and you delay the taxes. So the difficulty of that is the timing has to be really good. And then 2, for a lot of our investors, they still don't want to be actively managing that asset after they do the 1031. So what we'll do is we'll create what's called a tenant in common, where we will co-own the building with them. We'll find the asset, we'll help them roll their 1031 proceeds into it. We'll manage it as though it was a syndicate, but we're co-owners in it. And it's a way for them to preserve the 1031. And so all that's to say is that that's actually turned out to be a fairly significant portion of the deals that we do these days. They're not big deals by comparison to the syndicates or the fund that we do, but they end up being pretty meaningful for our investors because the biggest expense that you're going to pay in your life is typically your taxes. So anything that you can do to delay that is usually pretty advantageous. So it's a pretty cool service that we offer. We kind of fell into it backwards a number of years ago. We didn't know about it before. An investor came and said, "Hey, I got a 1031. Do you think you could help me out?" And in talking to our lawyers and our CPAs, we devised a means for facilitating it, and it's been pretty great so far.
Well, congratulations on the success on that. That's pretty phenomenal in 3.5, 4 years to take down $70 million worth of real estate. And I think that what I would like to impress upon the listeners is to know that you don't have to come from a pedigree of real estate investors. You don't have to come from knowing exactly how to do it all right. As Anthony, you just said, you fell into that one part of that, a tenant in common stuff, backwards. And I think it's about putting ourselves in the right place at the right time, which is interesting that you said that earlier as one of your kind of keys to success. Is that one of the things I teach my clients is that one of the keys to success is, of course, being in the right place at the right time. And sometimes it's lucky, but I think more often than not, we're putting ourselves in those places. We don't know that we are, but we find out that we're in that spot. For example, I don't know what's going to turn out from your Antarctica trip, but like you might have met somebody there that eventually you're going to do something pretty amazing with later. I have no idea, but you put yourself in Antarctica. It wasn't dumb luck. So if you do meet somebody who helps you get to that next level in life, it's because you put somebody there. Let me ask you another question. After you've experienced quite a bit of success in a short amount of time over the last 8 years, what do you think? What's your definition, Anthony, of success? How would you define that word for you? Like, what does that mean to you?
That's a good question. That a number of years ago, I did a podcast series with my buddy Austin Linney called The Brain Dump that was all about like unpacking the science of success and really trying to understand what's it mean to be successful. Because one of the things that I didn't realize when I was younger is that I was living a life in accordance with what I thought was everybody's definition of success. Like I thought there was one definition, like the American dream, right? And because my life wasn't in alignment with that, I thought myself to be a failure. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I realized that in the game of life, in the game of success, like you get to define exactly what it looks like to win and to lose. Like you get to chalk the field, you get to make the scorecard, and then you just get to live every day in alignment with that. And so for me, it's the ability to do what I want, when I want, how I want to do it, where I want to do it. And for me, a lot of it is just built into, am I moving towards my highest and best self? Like that's the thing that really gets me excited these days, is just knowing that I'm doing something that's progressing me, not necessarily around money, not necessarily around business, not necessarily around fitness or relationships, but like all of these things. Like it's this whole package of like, what would my highest and best, greatest self look like if I could just max out all the stats? Like, what would that look like? And I get really excited about just trying to like move towards that, because it's an unattainable ideal to be your greatest self, because you never, like, the goal isn't to be the best. The goal is to be better, and better has no finish line. Right. And once you understand that, then you just show up every day and like keep moving forward. And that's what success is just at the end of the day, did I move forward?
So with that as a definition of success, do you consider yourself to be a successful person?
It's interesting because you gotta win every day, right? Like every day is a new battle. Every minute is a new hour, like, or a new battle. You can break it down to like every second if you wanted to. So you just got to figure out what's the metric you're going to measure it by. And some days I feel very successful. Some days I feel horribly unsuccessful. And I talk about this all the time on Twitter and in Instagram, because I think a lot of people will look at people like us with platforms and will be talking about the highlight reels a lot of times, like, oh, look how we turned $7,500 into 70 million and like built this business. And people look at that and they're like, oh, you got it all figured out. And the truth is that, like, I would say even these days, only 60% of the time do I feel like I have it somewhat figured out. So that's barely more than half the time. The other 40% of the time, I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, what's actually happening? Because like I mentioned before, I have severe ADHD. And while I've figured out systems that have helped me get out of my way, the truth is I'm still constantly trying to get in my own way. And so you have to like keep showing up and fighting that battle. So long story short is, more days than not, I feel as though I'm moving forward and I'm winning and I'm successful. And that's good enough for me, because the goal will never be perfection. It's always progress over perfection.
Well, I think that's a very healthy perspective. After interviewing hundreds of people on this show and talking to them about their views of success, I think your perspective is very healthy, because, it is about progress. It's about moving from today to tomorrow to the next day, et cetera. And if, like you said, if more than half of those is moving in the right direction, I think we're probably doing all right. If we're going the other way, then yeah, we better do some self-reflection, some checking on things. So how many hours you got 12 employees, I think you said at Invictus Capital. You guys are managing about 70 million. You've got in-house property management. You're doing all the operations. How many hours a week does Anthony put active hours into Invictus Capital? Is this a full-time gig for you, or have you got it pretty much set on autopilot and you're just involved? Well, tell me a little bit about that.
That's a hard question to answer, because in my life, and I think in the life of a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, like, it's really hard to figure out how many hours did you actually work, because you're always thinking about the thing. Like it's almost never, and maybe I'm just not doing it right, but I don't know how to like dissociate when I'm just sitting on the couch and hanging out, or when I'm on a walk with my girlfriend, like how to not have it be cycling in the back of my mind. And truthfully, a lot of the work that you will do as the owner or the founder, the CEO, is thought. It's thinking. It's mulling over strategy, high level vision, and like what direction you want to move and how you want to move. And it's not so much the minutia of day to day. And one of the things I really struggled with as I started to step out of the day to day, getting the not grunt work, but the work that moves the wheel forward, is as you move towards having a team that does that for you, you feel more and more like, what am I really doing? Am I holding my team back? Am I actually helping? Because you spend so much time in meetings and talking to people and emailing and messaging and just thinking that you're like, it can be very hard sometimes to look and say, what did I actually do today? Like, you don't have a widget that you got to make. Like, you weren't working the line, so you don't have something you can point to. So all that's to say is, like, I'm always working. Like, I'm always thinking about it. But in terms of like day to day, does Invictus need of me? I would say it's probably realistically 2 to 3 hours, maybe a day. And then the rest of it is all around these types of conversations, where we're going on podcasts and spreading the message and just trying to attract people into our sphere, potential investors, or maybe a broker is listening to this who's from Minneapolis and like, oh, I got a deal. I want to show it to them. Right. Like, so this is a little bit more intangible stuff that's helping build the business. But at a certain point, you're like, you can't really measure the ROI on a spreadsheet. Right. But the truth is that, like, most of the things that are worth measuring in life can't be measured on a spreadsheet. And this is one of those things. So while this is technically in the job description, it's really hard to know, like, what's the ROI of this, rather than going and finding a resident, placing the resident, or doing a unit turn, right? And those things are very, very easy to measure.
Well, so there's this thing called the law of the architect. It's a universal law that kind of governs how businesses should be run by the founder of the business, who we refer to as the architect in the law. And there's only 3 jobs that the architect of any business should be doing at any to grow his or her business. Number 1, set the vision. Number 2, communicate that vision. And number 3, build the asset. So what you just described is that most of your active hours is about number 3. There is building the asset. And you're probably spending a lot of time effectively setting and communicating the vision to your people. And what I asked you was about active hours. And I think you answered it correctly, at least from the way I could tell. 2 to 3 hours of actually pushing paperwork and doing things. But most of your time is doing those 3 things, which is good, because that's why you've been successful. When we break the law of the architect, when we as the owners get involved in the daily minutia of pushing the rocks around and pushing paper and all that kind of stuff, that's when businesses don't succeed long term. They can't grow outside of our own ability. So congratulations on doing that. Whether or not you knew that or purposefully intentional about doing that, you are living according to the law of the architect. Nice. So congratulations.
Sweet. I did not know that, but it's good to have that confirmed.
Well, so I want to invite everybody to follow Anthony. I found him originally on Instagram. He's at the Anthony Vicino, and that's Vicino, the Anthony Vicino. He's also on YouTube. Got lots of great videos on YouTube, and you can look him up at youtube.com/Anthony Vicino. Same thing on LinkedIn at Anthony Vicino there. And then Twitter, he's also very active on Twitter, Anthony Vicino. So you've got a special offer that you're going to make to everybody. Would you like to explain that, or you want me to talk about what we talked about at the beginning? I'll give you the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, we have this community. One of the things that I really struggled with in the beginning of my journey was I knew I needed to upgrade my network, right? You hear all the time, your network is your net worth. But in the beginning, you're like, well, how do I get in the same room with badasses who are doing the things that I want to do? Especially if you're stepping into entrepreneurship for the first time and you're like, I don't know where to find other entrepreneurs. And so we created this community called Beyond the Apex for people who are interested in trying to create a life where they go beyond the apex. They're trying to be their best self. They're trying to move towards that every day. And so we created this community of awesome people that come together, and some of them are entrepreneurs. Some of them are W-2 workers who just love what they do and they just want to do it better. We have people in there who are struggling just with all the things that all humans struggle with, which is like, distraction and feelings of overwhelm or self-sabotage, like all the things that get in our way of achieving our highest and best self. And I think currently we're just under 1,000 members in there. So it's like 950-ish or so last time we looked. And it's an awesome community. We put out a ton of content. We have paid courses, we have free courses, like all around things like entrepreneurship, copywriting, how to tell stories, how to raise capital for real estate, how to develop hyperfocus. So it's a broad swath of content in there. And I invite your listeners, if you guys would love to come join us, like it's typically $50, but for you guys, we'll make it 25. So we'll give you guys the link for that and you can come join it. You can check it out for free too. And if you don't like it, like just ask me for your money back and we'll refund you. It's not a big deal at all. Like we want to make sure that this is a community that's being well served. It's our attempt to provide something that we wish we had when we were first starting out.
All right. So that's a good offer. If you are interested in investing, real estate investing specifically, Anthony and his group, Beyond Apex, is the community that you want to be involved in. Normally $50 a month. You get it $25 a month as a listener to the Root of All Success. Anthony, you want to tell them to email you with a code, or how do you want them to reach out?
Yep. Shoot me an email, anthony@invictusmultifamily.com, and say, hey, I listened to the podcast, loved it, would love to join the community. I'll hook you up with a special registration link. But do me a favor. Like if you do that, make sure that you've left a review for this podcast too, because a lot of work goes into podcasting and it's a bit of a thankless art. Like I know Jason's putting a ton of work into this. And so just take a moment before you shoot me that email to leave a review. And then when you shoot me the email, say, hey, I left a review. And if you did, I'll hook you up with something super secret, super awesome. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you're definitely going to want it. So make sure you leave that review first.
Well, I think I'm going to leave a review for my own and send you an email because I want to see what this. But thank you for those kind words. We do love the reviews as podcasters because obviously it does make us feel good to say that people like it. But more than that, it puts us up in front of of the other podcasts so that we get out in front of more people to make the impact. So email him, Anthony@invictusmultifamily.com. That's INVICTUS, 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 multifamily.com. And just make sure you've left the review for the Root of All Success and mention that you heard him on this show, the Root of All Success. And he'll not only give you that half off for Beyond the Apex community, but also something super special and private. Maybe it's a rock from Antarctica. We don't know. I don't know what it's going to give you. But Anthony, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I do enjoy following you on Instagram. Your videos are informative. They're well done. And so good on you, man. Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys. It was I love these conversations. They're a lot of fun. So thank you.
All right. Thanks. Well, there you have it. Another very successful entrepreneur about his journey to success and the power of delusional self-belief. His definition of success, I think, is interesting because it's one that a lot of people, I record every single one of these shows, of course, and then I write down a record of everybody's definition of success. And that definition that he gave, which is essentially being the ability to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, et cetera, that definition probably has appeared. If you call that verbatim, even though people say it a little bit different, that verbatim definition has appeared more than any other single definition. And what that refers to is freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of energy, the ability to make the choice and have control over your daily schedule. And Anthony has achieved that in just 10 years. Not really even 10, 8 years. So you can achieve it too, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, no matter if you're living in the back of a van in Oakland, California with $80,000 worth of debt. Within a few short years, you can be well on your way to being a multimillionaire, achieving success, and having complete freedom and control over all the things that you do every day. So listen to shows like this. Go watch YouTube channels like Anthony's. You can go to youtube.com/Anthony Vicino, and you can listen and see what he's doing to create wealth, generational wealth, not just for him, but it's going to be for his family, long-term, his kids, if he has them, later on. I mean, those are things that he's doing. What he's doing right now is going to be blessing people for generations to come. So I want you to go follow him at any of those places: YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. He's at Anthony Vicino. On Instagram, he's the Anthony Vicino. So go check him out there. And don't forget to send in for his free gift, and you get half off the Beyond the Apex community. Just email Anthony at invictusmultifamily.com, and just make sure you've left a review for the Root of All Success. Tell him that you did that. He's going to give you half off the community price. The community is $50 a month, but you can get it for $25, and then you also get a special free gift. So please tune in again next week when I talk with yet another very successful entrepreneur about his or her journey to success. Until then, I am the real Jason Duncan, and Jesus is King.
Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. Are you an entrepreneur who feels trapped in the weeds of daily operations, not experiencing the freedom you thought you'd have as a business owner? Want to know the way out? Take Jason's free exit readiness assessment to see how close you are to getting ready to experience true freedom and success as an entrepreneur. Go to amireadytoexit.com today. That's amireadytoexit.com. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.